The river was Samuel's only companion. Its endless murmur filled the silence of his cabin, its silver waters reflecting the stars when he sat alone at night. At 76, Samuel had long grown used to the quiet. His wife was gone. His children lived far away. The forest, with its towering pines and shifting seasons, was the only family that remained. On one storm-torn evening, when clouds rolled low and thunder cracked across the valley, Samuel stepped outside to check the river's rise. The water foamed, swollen from the downpour, gnawing at its banks like an untamed beast. That's when he heard it, faint at first, almost swallowed by the storm. A cry. Not the cry of a bird, nor the howl of a wolf. Something softer. Higher. It trembled with fear and desperation. Samuel's brows furrowed. He followed the sound into the dripping woods, his lantern flickering against sheets of rain. Branches clawed at his coat as he pushed deeper, his boots sinking into the mud. The cry grew louder, sharper, until he found it. Beneath a fallen tree, tangled in broken branches, lay a tiny bear cub. Its fur was soaked, its eyes wide with terror, its small body shivering violently in the cold. Samuel's heart clenched. He scanned the shadows for the mother, but none came. Only silence. Only the storm. He knew what that meant. The cub was alone. For a long moment, Samuel stood frozen. This was nature's way. Creatures lived, creatures died. He was just an old man. What right did he have to interfere? Then the cub whimpered again, a frail sound that pierced through his chest. Against every thought of reason, Samuel dropped to his knees, pried loose the branches, and gathered the shivering creature into his arms. The cub pressed its face against his chest, seeking warmth. And in that moment, thunder above, river roaring below, an unspoken promise was born. A promise that would last far longer than either of them could imagine. Morning light spilled across the cabin the next day, gilding the old wooden beams with soft gold. Samuel stirred from his chair, his arms stiff from cradling the cub through the night. For the first time in years, his sleep had not been haunted by silence, but by the sound of tiny breaths against his chest. The cub awoke with a pitiful squeak, blinking up at him with eyes the color of deep earth. Samuel chuckled softly. "Well, little one," he murmured, "looks like you've decided I'm your mother now." The days that followed were filled with trial and tenderness. Samuel fed the cub warm goat's milk from an old tin bottle, at first struggling as the creature pawed and fussed, then gradually watching as it grew stronger. He laid out blankets by the hearth, where the cub would curl up into a trembling ball of fur. And each night, as the wind moaned outside, Samuel would sit by the fire, humming old songs, while the cub's tiny heartbeat pressed against his leg. Soon the cabin echoed with new sounds, playful growls, the thud of clumsy paws on wooden floors, the crash of a tipped bucket sending water everywhere. Samuel found himself laughing again, belly deep and unrestrained, a sound he thought he'd buried with his youth. The forest, too, became their playground. By the river, the cub splashed recklessly while Samuel fished, often stealing the catch before Samuel could reel it in. In the meadows, the cub tumbled through tall grass, chasing butterflies it could never catch. At times, Samuel would sit on a stump, watching, a gentle smile carving lines into his weathered face. "Wild you may be," he would say, "but you're my wild." Weeks turned into months. The cub grew rapidly, stronger, faster, bolder. What once fit into the crook of Samuel's arms now filled half the cabin floor. Yet no matter how big it grew, whenever storms rumbled through the valley, the bear would return to Samuel's side, pressing close, just as it had on that first night. And Samuel, who once thought himself alone in the world, found his heart beating with a new rhythm, one that matched the forest, the river, and the small bear who had made him whole again. The summer sun burned longer each day, draping the valley in endless warmth. The cub, no longer so small, had grown into a powerful young bear, its muscles rippling beneath thick fur, its playful growls now carrying a deeper rumble. Samuel could see it in every step, every restless glance toward the tree line. The forest was calling. He had known this moment would come. He had raised wild creatures before, injured birds, a fox with a broken leg, but none had stayed. None could. The forest always reclaimed what was its own. Still, his chest tightened each time the bear wandered farther from the cabin, testing its strength against fallen logs, chasing deer through the meadows. Samuel would stand on the porch, hands gripping the rail, whispering words the bear couldn't understand. "Don't go too far, lad. Not yet." But he knew. Deep down he knew. One crisp morning, the river shimmered like glass as Samuel and the bear walked along its bank. The air was alive with the scent of pine and the distant cry of eagles. The bear paused often, sniffing the wind, ears twitching, as though something unseen beckoned from beyond. Samuel stopped too, his weathered hands trembling at his sides. He swallowed hard, forcing the words past the lump in his throat. "It's time, isn't it?" The bear looked back at him then, eyes dark and unreadable, yet filled with a strange knowing. For a moment, it lingered, torn between the bond they had forged and the instinct pulling it home. Then, with a low rumble, it turned toward the forest. Step by step, it moved into the trees, the shadows swallowing its massive frame. Samuel stood rooted, watching until the last trace of fur vanished into the green. The river whispered. The wind shifted. And for the first time in months, Samuel was truly alone again. Yet deep inside, a promise echoed: some bonds are not broken by distance, nor forgotten by time. Seasons turned like pages in a book, each one leaving its mark on Samuel's small cabin by the river. Autumn brought carpets of gold and crimson leaves, crunching under his boots as he gathered firewood alone. Winter followed with its long, merciless nights, where silence pressed heavy against the walls and the only company was the crackle of fire. Spring thawed the earth, filling the river with rushing life, and summer bloomed with warmth, but none of it filled the space that had been left behind. The bear had gone. At first, Samuel would step onto his porch at dusk, scanning the tree-line with stubborn hope. Every rustle of the undergrowth, every shadow shifting in the forest, sent his heart leaping, only to fall again when no familiar shape emerged. He spoke less as the months wore on. The cabin, once alive with laughter at the cub's antics, echoed only with the scrape of his chair and the sigh of his tired lungs. His hands, once steady enough to mend fences and chop wood with ease, grew slower. The river seemed louder now, as if mocking the silence within him. Word of his story spread among nearby villagers. Some would shake their heads, murmuring, "The old man claims he raised a bear." Children whispered about him as they passed by, their eyes wide with wonder. Most didn't believe him. Others dismissed it as the ramblings of age and solitude. But Samuel knew. He could still feel the weight of that small cub in his arms on the stormy night when it all began. He could still hear its low rumble of contentment by the fire. Years slipped by, blurring into one another. Samuel's back bent, his steps slowed, and the world grew heavier. Sometimes, in his loneliest hours, he wondered if he had dreamed at all, that the bond had been nothing more than an old man's fragile imagination. And yet, on quiet nights, when the moon shone over the river and the wind carried the scent of pine, Samuel swore he could feel eyes watching him from the tree-line, silent, patient, unseen. As though the forest itself remembered. It began with the smell of smoke. Samuel woke in the dead of night, his lungs heavy, the air thick with an acrid bite. He staggered to the porch and froze. Beyond the river, the forest glowed red. Flames licked the sky, roaring like a living beast, consuming trees in violent waves. Sparks rained from the canopy as wind whipped the fire closer with terrifying speed. His cabin would not stand a chance. Samuel snatched his walking stick and stumbled down the path toward the river. But his body was frail, his legs unsteady. The smoke clawed at his throat, blinding his eyes, and soon he lost his way in the choking haze. The roar of the fire grew louder, closer, until the heat burned his skin. He fell to his knees. His breath rasped, shallow and weak. At 78, Samuel knew this might be the end. Alone, in the forest he had loved. Then, through the fire's roar, came another sound. A heavy thud of paws. A deep, rolling growl that seemed to tremble through the ground itself. Out of the smoke, three massive shapes emerged, towering, dark, powerful. Bears. And leading them was one Samuel knew in an instant. The scar along its shoulder, the way its eyes fixed on him with fierce recognition, it was the cub he had once saved. Now grown, a full beast of the wild. Samuel's breath caught. "You?" The bear stepped closer, lowering its massive head until its muzzle brushed his arm, as if to say, "I remember." Before Samuel could comprehend, the bears moved around him, forming a living shield. Together they guided him, nudging, pushing, herding him like one of their own, through the choking smoke, away from the collapsing trees and into the safety of the riverbank. Samuel stumbled into the shallows, cold water rushing around his ankles. Behind him, the bears held their ground, roaring at the flames, refusing to move until the fire shifted away. Exhausted, trembling, Samuel sank into the river's edge, tears blurring his smoke-stung eyes. He looked at the beast before him, his cub now a giant, and whispered through cracked lips, "You came back." And in that moment, man and beast stood together, not as savior and saved, but as family. The fire that night changed everything. Samuel never forgot the sight of those bears standing between him and the flames, nor the weight of recognition in the eyes of the one he had raised. But just as quickly as they had come, they vanished back into the wild. The forest swallowed them once again, leaving Samuel alone on the riverbank, soaked and trembling, clutching his chest as though holding on to the moment itself. In the weeks that followed, villagers who heard his story shook their heads in disbelief. Bears saving a man, they scoffed. The old fellow's mind must be slipping. But Samuel didn't argue. He no longer needed anyone to believe. He knew. Years passed. His hair grew thin, his steps slower. The cabin aged with him, its wood groaning in the winds of each passing season. But Samuel felt no bitterness toward the solitude. He had been given a gift, proof that kindness sown in the past could return when most needed. One crisp autumn morning, he walked again to the river, leaning on his stick. Mist curled over the water, and the forest shimmered with amber light. He closed his eyes, listening to the steady rush of the current. That was when he heard it, deep, rumbling, and close. A growl. His eyes opened. Across the river stood a massive bear, towering and strong, its coat flecked with silver, as though time itself had brushed against it. And beside it, two smaller shapes, tumbling and playful, their growls high and clumsy. Cubs. The great bear fixed its gaze on him. Samuel's heart pounded. It was the same scarred shoulder, the same eyes that had once stared into his soul on a stormy night long ago. His cub, now a parent itself, had returned. For a long moment, they stood across the water, man and beast, generations between them. The bear nudged its cubs forward, letting them splash their paws in the river as though to say, "This is the one who showed me mercy. This is the one who saved me." Samuel's throat tightened, tears brimming as he whispered, "You kept your promise." The bear rumbled low, almost gentle, before turning back into the forest, its cubs scampering at its side. Samuel remained there long after, the mist curling around him, his heart full. And though he would one day leave the world behind, he knew this truth would never fade. Love given is never forgotten. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it returns. And sometimes it brings the wild itself back to your door.